Hey, you believers, non-believers, unaffiliated believers, sort of believers, and even you think I'm a believers, welcome to the Uncensored Unprofessor, a show where we do our best to apply theologic to all of life. I'm glad to have you with me. I'm always honored to think alongside folks who want to turn their brains on. Oh, yes, indeedy. Social media shares. Josh E., Victor S., Joanna J., Scott M., Debbie ML. Thanks, you guys, for your social media help. Thanks for posting a Uncensored Unprofessor URL link on your own social media post. You guys are helping me get the word out about a show designed for thinking Christians. My sincere thanks. And still more gratitude? My listener? My heartfelt kudos to you today. Thank you if you're a car mechanic, a cook, an HVAC installer, a fireman, a plumber, electrician, tire shop worker. If you're a carpenter, drywall hanger, roofer, real estate agent, long-haul trucker, dental hygienist, school teacher, policeman, court stenographer, sports official. If you stock grocery shelves, if you're a restaurant waiter, a bus driver, insurance adjuster, and even if you're a honeypot driver, me, I'm grateful for people who do stuff. Dads, moms. I'm grateful for all the hands-on, get-it-done kind of folks who make civilization possible. What you're doing is meaningful. Despite the widespread ennui, class, early here in the show, say with me, ennui, ennui, teacher. It's French for apathy, listlessness, indifference. Despite our culture's widespread ennui, vocation is significant. So thank you, sincerely, thank you. There is not only meaning in physical labor, there is beauty. And beauty's hard to define. My college students were frequently frustrated, especially in my class on theology and beauty, when I could not define beauty. Yes, there are common definitions, common synonyms for beauty: radiance, brilliance, effulgence, symmetry. Me, I enjoy defining beauty as an excessus, an overspilling, a splashing out, a something more. Beauty is an extension beyond the given, beyond the thing's own surface level, or something that goes out and penetrates beyond our own surface level. Beauty rings deep. Beauty stems from depth and calls to our depths. More commonly, beauty has been understood as that which is pleasing to the senses. Thank you for that one, Plato. And Plato? In fact, Plato held that beauty is the highest good. And it's the highest good not only because of its radiance, but because it brings us into contact with the divine. And on that point, I agree with Plato. Beauty, true, honest, to goodness, objective beauty, does bring us into contact with the divine. Why? Why does that happen? Why does beauty bring us to the divine? Well, because God is good, but not only good. God is true, but not only true. God is holy, but gulp, it sounds profane to say it. God's not merely holy. God is good and true and loyal and loving and holy. And when all those things come together, we get beauty. You see, beauty is not merely the pretty. Pretty can be small of soul, closed off, petty. Beauty is not merely the handsome. Handsome can be self-absorbed. Beauty involves the alignment of the good and the true. So by definition, something immoral cannot be beautiful. Immorality is not good. By definition, a lie cannot be beautiful, even if a lie is told with a brightly lit cherry red Philadelphia background. Lies are not true. And to deter a moment, because beauty involves the good, true, and holy, we aren't surprised that Western society has abandoned beauty as part of our shared vocabulary. In fact, beauty is shamelessly traded for the positively vulgar today. Think with me. When's the last time you heard anyone in a public discourse, public discussion, even mention beauty? Why that lacuna? Because we've been taught not to believe beauty is real, or that beauty is only in the eye of the beholder. But let me go back to positive angles of thought. Part of the problem with beauty is that we tend to only think of it in a visual sense, and I taught about beauty in my college classes primarily as a matter of visual appearance, visual presentation. I was trying to encourage college types to think missionally about beauty. How can we employ beauty in the Christian worldview for the sake of the gospel and God's glory? I mean, after all, we live in a culture obsessed by image. So why not employ beautiful visuals in our churches and homes to draw in outsiders and sculpt our own souls, so that beauty is both a matter of evangelism and discipleship? But anyway, my reflection today is not at all to denigrate visual beauty. No, I just want to take this in a different direction for you. Beauty, to think biblically, to think in an ancient Hebrew sense, has a hands-on quality. Beauty in the ancient Hebrew worldview flows out of fittingness. The Hebrew worldview was focused on actions far more than thoughts. And so, fittingness, form and function need to align. It's fitting for a bucket to carry water. It's fitting when a needle pulls thread. It's wonderfully fitting when a book is read. Fittingness spills out when an ox plows a field. It's symmetrically fitting for a gardener to care for her garden. Things, the ancient Hebrews believed, have an array of God-given purposes, and beauty flows out of both things and creatures when the God-given purpose is fulfilled. And that brings me back around to vocation. Human existence, God-given human existence, fits the form when we do things that benefit one another. God created we imago Deis to do. And I know, Protestants don't much like to think of doing things. Goodness, doing might take us to the topic of works, and mercy knows we can't bring reflections on works into our Christian faith. We can't do works for the glory of God. That would be, what?
Me, I love to work. It's good for me. In fact, I get plenty of exercise at work, jumping to conclusions, pushing my luck, and dodging deadlines.
Well, the biblical portrayal from beginning to end is that we were created imago Dei precisely in order to do. To do what? To do like God, to work like God. God's a worker. He created us to work. God's a designer. He created us to design. He's a master craftsman. He created us to be master craftsmen. Our working is not secondary to our being. We were created with the express purpose of working. Our work is sated with meaning. Our work was, the book of Genesis shows us, intended to saturate our lives with meaning and purpose. And the New Testament shows us that we will work even in the eschaton after the resurrection. So work inherently in itself is beautiful. So again, thanks to all of you who do stuff. For my part, I'm appreciative. You make life more beautiful. But let me give you another quality about beauty. And I gotta warn you, trigger warning, beauty is not fair. Beauty doesn't bother herself with equality. Like 16 sunrises in a row may be unremarkable, but out of nowhere on that 17th day, the sunrise explodes in beauty. 47 men in succession are not attractive, but out of nowhere that 48th man can be stunning, gripping. Oh, and on this one I promise you, because I do observe church foyer art, 4,278 paintings can be nice or charming or even colorful, but only that 4,279th painting is beautiful. What's going on? Beauty doesn't bother herself about treating everyone equally. So beauty in that regard, therefore, is somewhat random. Now, she'd be arbitrary and capricious if, when she appeared, she weren't so welcoming. But because beauty is always an offering, beauty can be ignored. And most of the time she is ignored. And that happens precisely because she is a voluntary offering. You see, born of goodness and truth and holiness, beauty will not force herself on anyone. And here's a deep mystery. Beauty isn't made sorry for being ignored. Beauty is sheer gift. And so, as it happens, 99% of the time, beauty is indeed ignored, but she doesn't get angry. She will simply make an appearance again at some later time whenever she so desires. Free gift. Born of goodness and truth and holiness, a quality that takes us to the divine. No wonder Russian Christian Fyodor Dostoevsky once famously wrote, "Beauty will save the world." Here's something else. Beauty isn't fair. She visits some and ignores others. And do you know what else isn't fair? Excellence. The other day I was at breakfast with some men from church.
What did y'all eat?
Well, 3 gents had oatmeal, 1 had steak and eggs. Me, I had 2 eggs and hash browns.
Oh, you made a great choice.
Oh, okay. But we were talking about the choir. Our choir had sang a couple hymns Sunday that were hauntingly beautiful. 6, maybe 8-part harmonies, minor chords that sent chills up my spine. I sat in the pews with my palms upraised, thanking God for the luxurious mixing of chords alone in that worship. I was barely paying attention to the words. So glorious were the sounds. Those chords were medicine to my soul. But where was I? Oh yeah, breakfast and excellence. The choir director, he's also a music professor, talked about how rare it is to have an untrained singer show up on campus out of the blue and suddenly be able to sing with excellence. No. He said the truly excellent have had years of lessons, training, practice, coaching. We see singers, my friend said, and think, wow, was he ever born with a set of pipes? And yes, he said, the luck of the draw called birth does affect musical ability, but a big chunk of it goes to excellence. The best singers have had lessons, coaching, and years of practice, investment. And so, how is that not fair? Because the investment required to be an excellent singer or musician has costs involved. And yes, of course, there are time costs involved. Those musicians who practice for an hour a day are consistently moving toward excellence in a way that those musicians who practice 1 hour a week are not. Excellence has a time, a duration cost. But excellence, and I want to be nuanced with you, excellence can also have a fiscal cost, a financial investment requirement. And right now our Pomo spirit, world spirit, our Pomo zeitgeist hates that. Think with me. What excellent action can you imagine that requires 0 financial sacrifice? Nothing by way of the trades. They all require the right tools, and having correct tools requires money. Music, again, requires sacrifice. Usually, 99 instances out of 100, the excellence of thought requires paying money to go learn how to think. Western society valued across 700 years the excellence of thought? And now today that's being openly traded for the indoctrination of correct feelings? No, Thinking well requires some work. And again, back to music, there's a financial and cost involved. And because of that, school boards sometimes try to help potential students get into music by offering public school music classes. And it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate how often the first thing cut in tight budgetary times are music programs. Those school board members know music is valuable, and so they invest in it. For a while. Oh man, and you're gonna you're gonna hate me. Because it's also unfortunate how often public school music programs are themselves permeated by dreck. I I attended my own children's school assembly performances when they were in elementary school, and I would sit there and cringe, and I would think, that's the best you can do with these kids? They aren't even hitting 2/3 of the notes. Oh, it wounded my soul. Excellence is not fair. Excellence has cost to it. Excellence can even have financial costs. There isn't a member of the PGA Tour whose parents escaped a couple decades worth of financial sacrifice. Golf lessons aren't cheap. And all that's not fair by the standards of our shallow, dead-souled, soul-killing, pomo world. No surprise then that we are, in almost every arena of shared life, seeing excellence traded for anything. But me, I value excellence. It's a many much more valuable quality to society, and so then for human flourish, than diversity or equality will be in 1,000 lifetimes. Even though it's been nearly 5 years of my casting this pod, I didn't have any uncensored unprofessor gear for sale. Well, with Michelle's help, that gap has been plugged. We have different sized tumblers and t-shirts, 4-set coasters, coffee mugs, and nice quality leather mouse pads, all for sale on the UU webpage. Just go to www.uncensoredunprofessor.com, and on the home page, right in the middle, is a big blue button. Click that link and you'll have access to the very well-appointed merch. You can listen to the UU while sipping Java from your UU mug. Climate change, aided by fluctuating weather, which in the old days was called weather, the climate change drum beats on. And it's wonderful that the weather is always changing. It always plays into the climate change narrative. Here's the kind of story the New York Times recently printed. Quote, "Climate change has made extreme weather increasingly normal." That's from September 7th. And the Times reports the kinds of things I covered a couple episodes ago: forest fires, floods, heat waves. Then they note an awful heat wave over in Pakistan where temperatures reached 120 degrees Fahrenheit. And it's been a hot summer. In Death Valley, California, a new record high temperature was set, 129.9 degrees, roasting hot. You got no argument from me about a hot summer. And yet, summers do get hot. And hot summers in California, pretty much normal. But the question is not, are we witnessing hot summers or winter blizzards? The science questions for me are twofold. A, are humans causing the change, or is this just more of the same climate fluctuation that Earth has witnessed for some 4 billion years? And B, can we do anything about it? Now, the answer to the first question, are humans causing the change, you know this, the answer to that is much disputed. Well, it's disputed when there's freedom to dispute it. The rest of the time, the White House's narrative keepers, also known as the social media cyber jackals, do their best to silence not only any dispute of human causation, but also even of asking any questions about human causation. But the answer to the second, can we do anything substantial about it? It's super expensive to do just a tiny fractional change, and most of it's based on hope. Climate scientist Bjorn Lomborg, in his book False Alarm, How Climate Change Panic Costs Us Trillions, Hurts the Poor, and Fails to Fix the Planet. By the way, you guys, it's an excellent book. He's a scientist, but he writes to help common schlubs like me think through the climate change issue, and he does that through many different angles. It reads really easy. He's not writing to impress scientists, even though the whole thing is footnoted up the waz. Lomborg shows that even when we spend trillions of dollars, the temperatures will only be reduced by a degree or so over 100 years, while the sea levels may only be changed by 1/10 of an inch over 100 years. I watch this and I think, we believe we're gods over the earth. It's so weird. And as my last episode, The Poorest of the Poor, showed, it's an uber expensive endeavor, one that commonly crushes the poor. And my running and constant suspicions? I don't for a second trust the people selling this stuff. Progressives all around the world, progressives who use the Wu-flu mass formation to control their populations, shutter school children, mandate the wearing of public masks, shut down church attendance, vehemently tried to limit family gatherings, and threaten the loss of jobs and houses and savings and electricity and dignity, and probably like me, you had relatives who, when they died, other family couldn't go see them. These same progressives forced injections that many studies are now showing have gruesome complications. All these weird tentacle-like strands in the blood of the recently dead, bizarro. My first suspicion is I don't trust the folks selling this stuff. And second, I don't trust the narrative when the uber much money is at stake. So I have scientific questions, massive questions, abiding questions, and questions of integrity. And in none of those areas am I satisfied. In fact, I believe the fix is in. And I'll speak to that next episode. Today I want to think with you about green energy. A few weeks ago, California's legislators approved a measure to eliminate all gas-powered cars by 2055.
No, you're wrong. It's 2035.
Oh man, as the years roll on, do you think the price of gas-powered cars in California is going to rise or what? Smaller supply equals greater demand equals higher prices. It is a strategic squeezing. Well, California has decided they're going to do their part by cutting CO2 emissions. We'll all watch from a distance. They can be the canary in the mine on all this. Anyway, like the rest of us, California has been enduring a hot summer. So hot, in fact, the capital has asked folks to cut back on their appliances and air conditioners. The New York Post, among others, reported that California's independent system operator, which runs the state's power grid, issued multiple bulletins this week warning of extreme heat during the Labor Day weekend that is likely to strain the grid with increased energy demands. The grid operator asked, the New York Post continued, he asked residents to voluntarily reduce their power consumption by avoiding large appliances and charging electrical vehicles during peak usage hours of 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. End quote. Now, on first blush, that makes sense. The electrical grid is overburdened, so everyone should cut back on their usage. But that only begs some questions. Questions like, why? Why is it overburdened? Why isn't California building their power grid? I I mean, the population has grown for 100 years, so why not plan for more use? California only has 2 coal-fired power plants. The last one was built in 1986. And I was curious, so I looked. We here in Spudland, we have no coal-fired plants. They tried to build one back in 2010, but they got nixed by the Sierra Club and the Idaho Conservation League. But back to California. Back in 2013, California shut down the nuclear reactor at San Onofre. Now the state is left with 1 nuclear reactor. And now that nuclear energy is much more safe, a la France, why not build more nuclear power plants? Nuclear is the cleanest energy on Earth. Get this. 70% of the electricity in France, 70% is generated by nuclear energy. They have 56 reactors across their country. How am I able to produce the podcast? With the help of my partners through Patreon, Patreon. Through pledges of $10, $20, $25, and $30, it's my partners who enable me to keep producing thick informational shows like this one today. I'd be delighted in your own support, my listener. If you value a show uniquely for thinking Christians, please go make a pledge at Patreon. But back to the Golden State. They just passed legislation to ban all gas-powered cars by 2035. And you know what? That's their right. But if you're planning to gradually eliminate fossil-fueled automobiles, why aren't you building up your power grid? And here we are in one hot summer, and they're asking their denizens to stop running appliances and electrical vehicles now. It doesn't add up. And here's another obvious question. If they're voluntolding you to not charge your car between 9 and 4 p.m. today, what's going to happen to all those EV owners as California moves toward 2035? Will those voluntolds become more common? And then, what if state politicians decide, and I know it's beyond all belief, COVID. What if those politicians decide that they don't want you charging up your EV's battery during the day precisely when the solar power stations are charging? Or what if they, for sake of changing the climate, make driving between certain hours illegal? I know that sounds crazy. Saying something like that would have seemed nutso 3 years ago, but today it's entirely plausible. Or what if they limit your planned vacation to 3 days worth of driving because cutting down on the electrical grid demands things like that? And you think, my listener, you think there aren't power-hungry politicians who wouldn't like to be the final arbiter on when the common people can and cannot drive their electric cars? To me, it seems that people are handing their freedom over much more too easily. The powers have already shown, especially in California, that they'll use a crisis to clamp down on individual freedoms. Why would you trust them with your car? Your ability to travel, shop, and visit family, it's wild to watch.
But Ed, you don't think you're being reactionary? Golly jeepers, like Pluto reminded me yesterday. The good politicians in California only shut society down for a couple years. Yuck.
Let's unpack more about green energies. Right now we have 2 primary renewable energies, wood and hydropower. Together these 2 comprise 85% of all renewable energy. 85%. The cool thing is, both of these renewables are there when we need them, although the water seems to be running out down in the Southwest. I mean, we can plant and regrow forests. By the way, the people who get irritated about those of us who use real trees for our in-home Christmas trees apparently do not realize there are things called nurseries, places called nurseries that grow these trees by the millions. We can plant seedlings, and in a couple decades they can grow into mature forests. I was surprised to know that 25 to 30 million nursery-grown Christmas trees are sold in America every year. And get this, there's something like 350 million trees growing today in Christmas tree farms across the country. Those farms account for 100,000 full and part-time jobs. And Oregon, North Carolina, and Michigan are the top 3 Christmas tree farms here in America. But back to renewables. Compared to wind and solar power, both wood and water are dependable. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. We heated our homes when I was a kid we would use wood stoves. Wood, Jerry, is dependable. My brother and I cut and sold wood for extra dollars one summer. But if the wind stops, wind power is helpless. When the sun is blocked by clouds, no solar power is what you get. And so, despite all the hype, solar and wind power add little by way of what is needed for the planet's energy needs. Wind power accounted for 2.5% of America's electricity in 2018. Solar power, the same year, accounted for 0.5%. And yeah, to be fair, the new Inflation Reduction Act will increase both solar and wind power in the USA, but doing so is more expensive than our fossil fuels. Still more about old school renewables? The human race, Bjorn Lomborg says, the human race just spent 2 centuries, the 19th and 20th centuries, doing our best to get away from renewables, wood and water. And yet, still today, 13 to 14% of global energy comes from heating with wood and animal dung. That's interesting. I'm reading a couple books on the Oregon Trail right now, and to heat their coffee and for cooking, when for weeks on end out on the barren prairies there was no wood, the pioneers used bois de vache, buffalo chips or cow chips. They used those to cook with. And today, same as it ever was.
Listen here, coffee seems to have a detectable, real earth scent to it.
Prior to the 19th century, most everyone on the planet was poor. We cooked and heated our homes burning wood and animal dung. Now, a huge reason that billions have been lifted out of poverty? Fossil fuel use. Fossil fuels are cheaper and more efficient than wood and water. Fossil fuel usage has made the entire race more prosperous. And please know that both solar and wind power come with their own abiding impact on the environment. Wind power brings with it the following detriments. Those who live near wind farms get tired of the noise those farms make. The whooshing sound of the big turbines can be heard a mile away. And then between 500,000 and 700,000 birds are killed each year by these turbines. And researchers estimate that one wind turbine alone can kill up to 40 million insects each year. How's that even possible? Killing millions of insects, obviously, has an effect on down the environmental chain. And wind farms kill tons of bats, too. And knowing that wind farms can be noisy, sometimes they're purposefully built away from towns and cities. But the doing of that construction, it involves grading and paving new roads, which have their own effects on the ecology. Still more, wind turbine, the long arms ranging in length between 60 feet and 350 feet, and it seems to me that here on the freeway in Spudlandia, I've been seeing these going down the freeway. They have a parade of flag cars, and then there's some massive semi pulling a 300-foot-long, football-long trailer with a wind turbine on. It's really impressive to look at them. But they're made out of steel and iron and plastics and fiberglass that's hardened to the consistency of Kevlar. Fiberglass is the most common ingredient. They also can use glass or epoxies. Each blade arm lasts about 10 years. Builders hope to extend that out to 20 to 25 years with future modifications. Teacher, I see that hand at the back of the classroom. Yes, Debbie, what's your question? You want to know how wind turbines affect the environment when they're taken down and hauled away? Sure. And thanks for raising your hand. So what happens when these long turbines are hauled away? Well, crushing equipment is not presently big enough to crush these huge arms, so they're stored and junked, mostly intact. And get this, National Public Radio reports that researchers estimate the United States will have more than 720,000 tons of blade material to dispose of over the next 20 years, a figure that doesn't include newer, taller, higher capacity versions. NPR continued. There aren't many options to recycle or trash turbine blades, and what options do exist are expensive, partly because the U.S. wind industry is so young. It's a waste problem that runs counter to what the industry is held up to be, a perfect solution for environmentalists looking to combat climate change. End quote. That wasn't Fox News, that was NPR. And what about battery power? Can't we replenish our energy capacities with batteries? Well, actually, we're nowhere even close to making that a reality. Today in the USA alone, there are enough batteries to cover 14 seconds of the amount of energy used each day by the nation. 14 seconds. Battery power is eons away from being sufficient. And that's interesting to me because something like 12 years ago, I had heard there was a battery plant in San Jose that was only moments away from releasing the most powerful battery ever, a battery that could be recharged and which would in fact help us feed our enormous energy demands. But I guess that San Jose plant never actualized the buzz on the street about them. Let's talk about materials inside of EV batteries, electric vehicle batteries. Cobalt, manganese, nickel, graphite, and lithium, which is the main ingredient. How much lithium is needed if the whole planet is going to stop using fossil-fueled cars? Well, according to Forbes magazine, that would be about 20 million tons. Forbes also reports that estimates are that there is between 30 and 90 million tons of lithium in the earth. So we'll eventually run out, but we don't know when that'll happen. It could be as soon as 2040, or the supply could last until 2100. But, Forbes adds, the problem doesn't lie in the amount of lithium, because we're not going to run out in the next 10 years. The problem is how fast it can be mined. So as the demand for lithium increases, the purchase price point will also increase, and we're going to watch and see how long it takes for global demand to make electrical vehicles pretty darn near unaffordable. And then specifically regarding EV batteries, yep, let's be fair, EVs get better gas mileage. Yeah, they run cleaner. They cost less to operate. All of that's good. You got no arguments from me there. But when we compare EVs to gas-powered cars, we need to not only ask about gas mileage or how clean they run, there's also the question of cradle-to-grave decarbonization. In other words, over the course of their lifetimes, which causes more pollution? And then there's the cost of replacing those EV batteries. Some of you listening may have already had to go through this. In Hyundai's and Toyota's, EV batteries cost averages of around $2,900 today. But if you own a Nissan Leaf, that jumps up to $6,200. Or Gersh. And then Tesla owners, it's close to $16,000 to replace a Tesla Model 3 battery. Other EV battery issues? Not all EVs have a fast charging feature built in. And then we have to ask, are there enough charging stations available for the hoped-for explosion of the Biden administration? Because When it comes to recharging an EV battery, it takes much longer than going to a traditional gas station. Depending on your car or your battery, it can take 1 hour to 30 hours to recharge. That's not convenient. Is there a charging station on the route you normally drive? Comes down to location, location, location. Oh, and then I learned that those charging stations aren't cheap to build and aren't at all easy to get through federal red tape policies. So, yeah, they can be built, but will they be built fast enough to keep up with Slotchy Joe's Inflation Reduction green energy mandates? Time will tell, and pretty fast. One last challenge that will inevitably confront EV owners: the cost of recharging. If the feds cut down on fossil fuels and thereby increase the cost of electricity and increase the mandates to own EVs, the price of recharging will necessarily increase. And I wonder, at what point will EVs undo themselves? In other words, at what point will EVs cost more energy to operate than fossil fuel cars? I don't hear hardly anyone discussing these matters. So, am I against solar power? No. Opposed to wind power? Those who want to help safeguard the climate by using them are free to do so. But the question has to be asked, are they helping? Because on average, Bjorn Lomborg reports, quote, the private benefit of using solar panels is worth only 30 to 41% of the total costs, close quote. Neither wind nor solar is the panacea that our politicians sell us. Both solar and wind power are themselves, in the long term, detrimental to the environment. And as I said in an earlier episode, the political drive toward renewable energy is cutting into nations' annual GDP. Cutting fossil fuel usage hurts production and shipping and supply lines. Germany's now decade-old policy called the Energiewende, that policy that cut nuclear energy and the Germans' ability to use fossil fuels. A couple decades ago, 84% of Germany's power needs were met with fossil fuels. Today, it's only 79% fossil fuel driven. They've cut it down by 5%. But we're not even a little bit surprised to know that the price of electricity in Germany has doubled over the past 2 decades. Cutting down on fossil fuel usage has driven up the price. Dimension in Germany now pay 3 times the average that we Americans pay for electricity. So, yeah, Germany is indeed powering more of their nation with renewables, wind and solar, but it is enormously expensive to do so. And again, with the war in Ukraine seeing Russia's fossil fuel contribution to Western Europe get cut, the Germans, among others, face the prospect of a long, cold, and expensive winter. Germany's neighbors in the European Union, they too are trying hard to minimize their dependence on fossil fuels. On the upside, they've gone from seeing renewables go from 6% to 14%. But man, get this. On the downside, the largest source of renewable energy in that 8% gain is from, drum roll, the wood the EU imports from forests in the United States. The EU is going back to old school renewables, and to ship all that wood across the Atlantic, it emits more carbon dioxide than if they were just burning coal to begin with. Queso sagrado. How do politicians dodge all of the enormous costs that climate change policies force upon their citizens? Either by downplaying those costs or telling the people that there will be net gains. And those maneuvers are precisely what the progressives are selling here in the United States with their Inflation Reduction, Green Energy Act boondoggle. What's our uptake today? Green energies are not Not yet here in 2022, even close to being sufficient to power our economy. And worse, if you're a climate change adherent, those green energies may not be, in the long run, as clean as we're being told. But then, that's where discernment and wisdom enter the picture. My listener, thanks so much for joining me today. Please go now and turn your beautiful God-given brains on.